Okay, welcome to Murray City Council meeting. Tonight we have scheduled Committee of the Whole, a short break, and at 6:30 council meeting. As you can see, the RDA went way over, and we're going to go into Committee of the Whole now. Because of the current health pandemic, and in order to comply with the governor's directive to stay safe and stay home, the public health order issued by the county health department and the county mayor, we have determined that an in-person meeting, including attendance by the public and the council, is not practical or prudent. Therefore, this meeting will be held remotely through electronic means. Each person is participating from separate locations. We are totally dependent upon the internet and technology to broadcast this meeting and to ensure that the public has the opportunity to view the proceedings. However, there could be a malfunction that is totally out of our control. We do not expect any issues, but want to make you aware of the possibility. If you would like to submit citizen comments or public hearing comments, please email us to city.council@murray.utah.gov. That's city.council@murray.utah.gov. This should be less than 3 minutes, including your name and contact information, and they will be read into the record. All council members are present. And once again, the RDA meeting went way over, so council meeting will immediately follow the meeting of the whole. With that, I will ask for approval of the minutes of April 21st and May 5th. Do I have any changes or a motion?
Gail, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the Committee of the Whole for April 21st and May 5th, 2020.
Thank you, Diane. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Jennifer.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Ms. Turner?
Aye.
Ms. Martinez?
Aye.
Mr. Hales?
Aye.
Mr. Cox?
Aye. Okay, discussion items. Animal control ordinance proposal, Kat Martinez and Rachel Hadley, 10 minutes.
All right, I'll just introduce Rachel. She's the advocacy director at the Humane Society, and the Humane Society is in District 1, my district, and she approached me about some thoughts on our ordinance and how it impacted the Humane Society and the animals during COVID-19's initial breakout, and some other thoughts. So Rachel, I'll just turn it over to you and let you introduce your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the entire council for listening to me. And while I have you, I actually wanted to thank you for the swift action on the Fountain of Youth building. It has been a thorn in my side since I started at the Humane Society a couple months ago, and to know that there is an end in sight is really encouraging. So regarding the pet limit ordinance in Murray, currently as it stands, it's the limit is 2 dogs and 2 cats, which seems reasonable. However, we would like there to be no limit on pets, which I know sounds scary, but with the caveat that the animals that people have cannot become a nuisance. And the catalyst for this is twofold. One is practicality. With Salt Lake County Animal Services taking over animal control services for Murray, it makes sense to have it be consistent. And in the county, there is no limit on pets. So it makes sense to have it just across the board. And the second part is kind of selfishness on our part. The Murray ordinance has impacted our foster pool, and we've relied on foster care for our animals more than ever during COVID. We are working at a reduced capacity with our workforce, and we're also working on appointment only, so animals are staying longer. And for their health and for their mental welfare, it's a little bit easier for that to have them into foster homes. Actually had a volunteer approach me about this because she said the amount of animals she had of her own made it impossible for her to foster for us. And is there anything we could do? So I thought I'd try. So I want to go over with you just 3 main points of why pet limit laws are a little bit antiquated. The first is that they're overly broad. The second is that they're a bit redundant. And the third is that they reduce compliance with pet licensing. So, sorry, I'm a little out of breath for no apparent reason. So overly broad, they penalize responsible pet owners. Often an argument is made that pet limits reduce incidents of hoarding, but there's no evidence to support that pet limit laws impact hoarding or animal cruelty. Hoarding is a mental illness. It's not merely an accumulation of animals. So there are 3 main aspects to hoarding as a disorder. One is accumulation of a number of animals. Second is an inability to provide minimum care for those animals. And then third is a denial of the inability to care for those animals. So by only focusing on the number and doing not much else, we're just kind of doing nothing to correct the hoarding behaviors. And instead, we're kind of criminalizing responsible pet owners that have a large amount of animals, or what may be considered a large amount of animals in respect to our ordinance. But many of the families that are impacted by pet limit ordinances are those that don't impact their neighbors or interfere with their rights. And it's unfair to punish them and make them choose between keeping their furry family member or having to move out of Murray. Secondly, they're redundant. As I mentioned, we already have nuisance abatement laws and we have animal cruelty laws. The heart of a pet limit ordinance is nuisance abatement and prevention of animal cruelty, such as in the case of hoarders, as we already talked about at length. So we already have nuisance abatement, animal cruelty laws. We should be focusing enforcement on the actual problem and not on ancillary issues like number of animals. Unfortunately, what often happens with these types of ordinances is neighbors use them as a weapon in disputes. So once animal control responds, they see that there's a prima facie violation of the ordinance. And what happens is pet owners, even if they are taking immaculate care of their animals, they're left with this impossible choice of, do I keep my animal and have to move, which most people can't do on a dime, or do I rehome my animal? Worse, they end up with their animal coming to us, which is obviously a burden on us. And even worse is if they choose not to mitigate at all, and animal control has to impound at taxpayer expense. That becomes problematic, not just because nobody wants animals impounded necessarily, but it also is a drain on municipal shelter resources. And it takes animal control away from what they should be doing, which is community-based outreach. And instead, they're taking care of a number of animals that had good homes that were taken away just because of an antiquated ordinance. And then lastly, and in my opinion, most importantly, by getting rid of pet limit laws, what you're doing is encouraging people to voluntarily comply with pet licensing. When you have a limit on animals, people will hide, they'll go underground with how many animals they have, and they won't license them. It makes sense that if they don't have to hide that, they're more likely to comply and license their animals, which leads to an additional revenue stream for animal services and helps us track the care that's necessary for these animals. So in short, pet limit laws do not prevent hoarders from keeping large numbers of animals, but they do discourage residents who responsibly care for multiple animals from reporting those animals to the municipality and paying licensing fees. Overall, we find these counterproductive. So I'm hoping you'll consider a change to the ordinance, and I really appreciate your time. And I'll take any questions you have.
Kat, do you have anything to add?
The one thing I would add is when Rachel and I were talking, we also discussed the issues of when a person's pet, like if their cat has kittens or their dog has puppies, that there's no allowance in the ordinance currently to allow them to stay with the parent animal for the amount of weeks the state legislature has put in code there. So also keeping that in mind.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the council?
No, I just want to state, I got a call about this, that I have neighbors and constituents that are in support of it. So thank you for being mindful and presenting, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you for putting up with my excessive breathing and fast speaking. It's a little awkward working from home and this kind of stuff. I would much rather be in front of you in person.
You did great.
All right. Thank you, Rachel and Kat. Next, we have a discussion of Murray City Police Department policies. Mayor Camp and Chief Burnett.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, Chief Burnett will be addressing the questions that were asked by Councilmember Martinez in her email on June 5th. And at the conclusion of Chief Burnett's presentation, I'd like to take a couple of minutes for a couple of additional comments. So, Chief Burnett.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the opportunity. Excuse me, the opportunity to talk about some of the things that we're doing. I think it's always important that people understand where we are, what's going on, especially with what's going on in our country today. It's never too much for us to talk about some of the things that we do and make sure we're where we should be. And looking at the things that we were asked to look at were the recommendations from the Police Use of Force Project and Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And so I'm going to share my screen and I've got a slideshow so we can, well, maybe, I'll get there. Okay. If I figure out how to do this without. Well, I can't find the icon to open this up because the pictures are in the way. So but anyway, where am I at? Here we go. So, sorry, I'm obviously technically challenged here at the moment. First thing we talked about was on the list we want to talk about was to require officers to de-escalate. Now, I changed that because the email we got said to escalate, and I think what we were meaning was de-escalate. Where possible through communication, maintaining distance, slowing things down, and otherwise eliminating the need for the use of force. And as I get into this, maybe I can talk about real quickly our policies and procedures. We are part of a program that we pay to have our policies and procedures put together and written for us from a company called Lexipol. They're a group of attorneys in California that do police best practices and policies throughout the country and for most of, at least here in Salt Lake County. So our policies and procedures are going to be in line with a lot of what's going on in other agencies. We do have the ability to change those and make them fit our specific situations. But our policy states that officers should only use the amount of force that is reasonably necessary given the facts and circumstances, and make sure that it's they're accomplishing a legitimate law enforcement purpose. So there's different factors of reasonableness that needs to be taken into account whenever we're dealing with anyone. So we work on de-escalation. Every officer going through basic training in the police academy, and that's like 586 hours, I believe, is how long basic training is. By state law now, they do train them in de-escalation tactics and procedures, and we do that in training in our department at least twice a year. One of those things that we're always working on, trying to make sure we're getting different looks at it and working on our de-escalation training. So usually a lot of it happens when we're doing our defensive tactics and arrest control training. This is where we talk about how to safely handcuff someone and make sure the officers are safe and the person that we're dealing with is also safe. Part of that is verbal de-escalation, because if we can accomplish this without having to touch anybody, we're more happy about that than just about anybody else. Several times a year, we do use of force training. That does include our firearms and our deadly force training, but we also have a virtual simulator at our training center where we're able to put in up scenarios that come with this simulator, and the officers have to make decisions, interact with the simulator, and it requires a lot of verbal de-escalation and other things that they need to do before any type of force is required, if at all. And that's kind of what we're doing, is making sure that they follow procedures and try to understand what's going on in front of them before they make any big decisions. Also along those lines, we have several officers that have been through the crisis intervention team training. This is a very intensive training where they spend I think it's at least 40 hours in class. They talk about mental health issues, things, how to recognize people in distress, how to deal with them, and methods of trying to de-escalate. So there's things that we're doing that, and each year we have to have a minimum of 40 hours of training to maintain our certification, and that is part of it, and something that we're continually looking at to make sure that we're giving our officers the best tools that they have. The next one was prohibit officers from using maneuvers that cut off oxygen or blood flow, including chokeholds or carotid restraints, which often result in death or serious injury. I want you to know we don't train that. I've been doing this job for 37 years. I've never been trained that. We don't train it. It's not in our policy. And our officers are expected to know the policies and procedures, and they're expected to follow them. And when they violate policies and procedures, there's consequences. So we don't train it. And in fact, I put on there what it talks about in our policy, where it specifically states that they should not intentionally use any technique that restricts blood flow to the head, restricts respiration, or which creates a reasonable likelihood that blood flow to the head or respiration would be restricted. Officers are encouraged to use techniques and methods taught by the Murray Police Department for this specific purpose. And since we don't train that, it's not in our, they're not trained that. So I think that's probably the best thing I can say is if someone were to use that other than trying to save their own life, we've got major issues, and they have issues. Okay, I'm messing this up. All right, the next one. Require officers to intervene and stop excessive or unnecessary force used by other officers and report these incidents immediately to a supervisor. Yes, like I say in bold there, this is required in our policy. Officers, if an officer sees something, it's not right, they don't think it's right, they need to do whatever they can do at the moment to try to stop that, and they're bound by policy to report it. So if they're following policy, they're making sure that the other officers are within, are doing what they should be doing, and then they should be reporting it if there's a problem. The other would be restrict officers from shooting at moving vehicles, which is particularly dangerous and ineffective. You know, we would agree with that. And officers, by our policy, are restricted from shooting at moving vehicles in most situations. To completely ban it doesn't make any sense, but we never shoot at cars. You never shoot at a car to stop them or to disable the vehicle, none of that. The only time anybody would ever be using or shooting at a car would be their lives in danger. We end up with the situation in South Salt Lake a year ago where the officer was killed because the car ran him over intentionally. So yeah, we don't train it, and they should never be shooting at or from a moving car. Like it says, except for in most situations. So talking kind of fast. So Limit the types of force and or weapons that can be used to respond to specific types of resistance and specific characteristics such as age, size, and or disability. And it's impossible to say in every scenario what you will do this in that situation, but we do train and we do talk about specific issues and situations, and depending on the mental state or the size or the age. I mean, there are things that are taken into account when there's a possibility that force has to be used. But to say you're going to start here and you have to work your way up, that's not always possible. And we have to, you have to be able to make decisions rather quickly that maybe hopefully save your life. Things can change and go from 0 to 100 in a second, just like it did in Ogden 2 weeks ago. Talking to the guy on the store, and he shuts the door, the officer turns around to talk to the other officer, the guy opens the door up, and we know what happened there. So, it's hard to say this is exactly what we'll do each time, but we try to train the best we can, go through the scenarios the best we can, so that there's thoughts and there's things that they know what they can do and how they can do it. And that's the whole point of training, is trying to get that muscle memory of how to interact with people and how to respond to certain circumstances. The other one is to require officers to exhaust all their reasonable means before resorting to deadly force. Well, yes, and that's what the training is. That's the ultimate use of force, or anything that anybody always or that would ever have to use, and it's definitely the last resort, and that's all governed by state and federal law that says when it's even legal for that to happen. So we pound that in training, as to make sure that we understand what that is. I mean, there's a great amount of responsibility placed on these young officers. We put them through training. We sent them to the academy for 4 months. We train them every day or every year, and they're always in training, trying to get them to understand and be able to do all the different things that we're asking them to do. And so there's a lot of training and a lot of work that goes through with that. Require officers to give verbal warning when possible before resorting to deadly force, and that is in our policy. It is also in the state law that a verbal warning should always be given, if feasible, before any deadly force is used. So that is in our policy, and it is, like I say, state law, and that is how they're trained. Require officers to report each time they use force or threaten to use force, and parentheses, it says pointing a taser gun at someone. And I'd like to just say that's all uses of force, whether it's just putting hands on somebody, anytime there's any force at all. Our policy requires that they notify their supervisor. The supervisor needs to come to the scene if they're not there, assess what happened, check the person out who the force was used against, to make sure there's no medical treatment that needs to be done. And then the supervisor is required to do a report, and that report's forwarded up to the department, where we look at whether the use of force was reasonable, whether it was within policy, whether it was in law, and are there training issues that we need to look at. So we try to look at those each time that happens, and that is required by our policy. Require officers to give a verbal warning when possible before using serious force, such as shooting, tasing, or pepper spraying someone. We already talked about with shooting. Yes, we do that as much as feasible. With our pepper spray and taser, that is part of the training. If you're around and the officers and you hear someone start yelling taser, 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 you better get out of the way and hope that it's not aimed at you. But they're going to tell them, if you don't comply, we're going to use the taser or the pepper spray. And so that's part of that de-escalation. You try to talk them down before you have to get to that point. So that is something that we do train, do teach, and is part of our policy. This next slide was another question. It said, we were asked, what training and resources do officers have to safely interact with members of the public with a wide variety of disabilities, and what is the process for accessing ASL interpreters as needed? We have training where we have members of the deaf community come and talk to us, give us some indication of how to basically communicate. That is some training that occurs through the dispatch center, through VEC. We're able to access ASL interpreters and multiple languages, because if somebody, while we're talking to them and they ask for an interpreter, whether it's an American Sign Language or it's another language, we need to get somebody who can interpret for them so that they hopefully understand what we're trying to do, what's going on. So there is the language line. We're able to, with different languages, most of that can be handled by phone. Sometimes, depending on the situation, with somebody who is hearing impaired, an interpreter will come to where we're at and will help us out. We currently have an officer on our department who has been certified as a ASL interpreter because she does have has had issues with being hearing impaired and is very good at that. So we do have that resource that we work with. You know, and I've been asked about how things have been going during the coronavirus and how our calls, whether we're seeing a lot of calls of any particular kind, or are we busy? You know, we've seen a decrease in some of our overall calls. But what we're seeing an increase in are people who are in distress. A lot of welfare checks and dealing with people who are struggling mentally. So I want to make sure that we understand that we're doing our best to try to get the resources for them that we can. We utilize the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team, which is called MCOT, and that's managed by UNI, which is up at the U of U, the Utah Neuropsychiatric Institute. But they'll come to the scene. They help us with people that we're struggling with. If they can handle them by the phone or however, you know, so that we do have some resources that we are able to utilize in dealing with people who are in a mental health crisis. And then, like I said earlier, with our crisis intervention training, that is a lot of what that training is geared towards. And we have some that have been through the advanced training for that also. And this helps us with just dealing with regular citizens, but also our homeless population. You know, we usually trying to help them, making sure that they're getting the resources they need and getting a hold of the health department or workforce services, and a lot of times it's the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team to help them with their some of their mental health crises. The other question was, with an overwhelming number of calls being related to domestic violence, how does the department use social workers? And we don't have social workers employed by the police department, but we have 2 full-time victim advocates, and I think currently they have 4 volunteers, and they're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when the officers are on scene of a domestic, if the need is there, they're able to get one of the victim advocates or their volunteers that can come help them get emergency housing. The victim advocates will work with them to get them the social services that they need, whether it are social workers or helping them through the legal process. Everybody needs a little help, and it's a daunting program I shouldn't say program, but system to try to get through, and they're very good at that. So they help lead them and get them hopefully to the resources that somebody would need. Maybe just some additional training that I can share with you that we do. I mean, I talked about our virtual simulator and our crisis intervention training, but for the last couple of years, we have implemented implicit bias training that we require every one of our employees, not just the police officers, to go through. And we've got a professor from the University of Utah that comes and was here last year, and we're in the process of having him come back and talk to us and work with the officers and the employees about implicit bias and helping us do whatever we can to be a little more understanding of everyone, and that goes all the way across the board. There's a lot of different things that we need that he deals with and works with and tries to talk to the officers about. So, we'd be willing to have any of you who on the council that haven't had the opportunity to go through our Citizens Academy. We do that. We'll just have to wait and see how things go this winter with the virus. But usually in the after the first of the year, we were planning on having a Citizens Academy where we actually go through all of what we do and peel all the parts off the onion so you can see what's inside and what we're doing and how it's done. And even with that, we'd be glad to have you come over and see our virtual simulator and see how that works. That's kind of can be entertaining, but I think it helps you have an idea of what some of the training and the things that we do. I know our officers are working hard, doing the best they can with the training they have, and our goal is to try to make sure they have the best training that they can get. These are all things that everybody's concerned about. I've been working here for a long time, and I've lived here my whole life, and my family lives here, my kids live here, my grandkids. So what goes on in Murray is important to me, and I want to make sure that that we're all feeling comfortable with what we're doing. And I think that our policies and procedures, and we're trying to do the best we can do. I think that was all of those that I had.
Okay, do you want anybody have any questions, or do you want to go first, Mayor, and then go to questions?
Either way, Mr. Chair.
Why don't you go ahead, Mayor?
Okay. Thank you. I just want to take a minute again to reiterate my support for our outstanding police department. Are they perfect? No. But day in and day out, they do an outstanding and professional job, and I just really appreciate them. Now, that said, I'd like to make two proposals to the council this evening for further discussion in a future meeting. Number one, I'm proposing a joint resolution of the mayor and municipal council of Murray City affirming the city's commitment to police accountability and racial justice in city policing practices. My office has been working with the city attorney on drafting a resolution that we'll send out to you, the council, by email at the conclusion of this meeting. I'm asking that each of you review the document and suggest changes, additions, or deletions to it. It is a draft. My hope is that we can ultimately agree on a document that we can present at a council meeting in the near future as a joint resolution. That's the first proposal. The second is that I'm proposing the creation of a public safety advisory board that would be made up of a cross-section of community members. The purpose of this board will be to review existing police and fire department procedures, policies, standards, and programs, and to make recommendations to the police chief, the fire chief, and the mayor. In addition, the board may provide timely feedback regarding community concerns and issues. I believe that this is a proactive approach to public safety rather than a reactive approach. So if the members of the council have no objection to this approach, I'll instruct the city attorney to draft a proposed ordinance to create the board so it can be discussed at a future committee of the whole meeting. And that's the end of my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Any comments from the council?
Yes. Mayor, I support both of those initiatives. I think they're great ideas, and I think they'll be really, really helpful. So thank you for that. And also for the chief, thanks for your presentation. And I'm wondering if it might be helpful to provide funding to have a social worker on your staff. Do you think that would be helpful or superfluous, or what are your thoughts on that, Chief Burnett?
Well, I think the big thing that we've never really looked at that deeply with is because of the funding. But with some of the things that go on, and with a lot of our, I hate to use the word homeless, there's a better word for that, but that we have around here, there could be a need. It's a matter of how that would work and how we would utilize that, and whether we'd be able to keep, or how we would keep that busy, but something that we could definitely talk about and look at.
Perhaps they could also provide training as well on an ongoing basis. And I mean, I think it might be something we could consider for discussion.
Thank you, Diane. Anyone else?
I just want to thank the mayor for bringing those two proposals. I think they're wonderful. I think they're exactly what we need focused moving forward, like you said, proactively. And I want to thank the chief for answering all of those questions. And I just, it's really frustrating, I think, how polarizing the issue of public safety is in these conversations. And I had many residents reach out and I said, do you want this to be public comment or citizens comment? And they said no, because they didn't want to come across as anti-police when they just wanted to know what our policies were. So I just want to really emphatically say, like, I have great respect for you. And it's just so wonderful to hear the best practices that Murray's using. And I don't think that surprises our residents to know that out of all of the challenges and ways that cities across the country are looking at adjusting their policies, that we already have such strong policies and training in place. So I just want to thank you for your thoughtful answers and for making it available to the public to answer their questions and concerns. I just really appreciate that, and you.
Okay, thank you. And we too, I've been getting phone calls and emails with, and they're very good, and they're very polite and supportive, but they're asking the same questions, and we have no problem answering. You know, that's what we're here for.
Anyone else?
I just want to say I do appreciate this conversation being had at Committee of the Whole. So I really appreciate the mayor bringing that forward, and also for you, Chief. And so I am looking forward to the resolutions and just kind of diving into that and seeing what gets proposed to us. One of the questions I did have are, what are some of the training programs? Is it a program? Is it a part of already that you are doing kind of for de-escalation? Is it somebody that you hire out, that you bring somebody in to train the staff, or is that just a part of new orientation training and something that's ongoing that you guys do internally? That was
the easy answer is yes. We have people on staff who are trained as trainers, and so they do a lot of it. We also find it's important to bring somebody in from outside who has a different perspective or has another way of training and things that they can try to teach us. So we try to do both. Bring trainers in from other professional people to come in and work with us or teach us something, as well as our folks who have been certified as trainers. And it is ongoing. There's something that happens while they're in the academy, but it's something we do every year, at least twice a year. And it tends to be more because it becomes part of a lot of training, but where it's specifically de-escalation.
Perfect. Thank you. I kind of wanted to highlight that and just kind of hear from you as well. And I appreciate Diane's question too about the social worker. If there's a need, I think definitely in these times we may find that there is a need and that we need to place somebody in that role to help as well. So thank you so much, Chief.
Yeah, I'd like to add my comments. Thank you, Mayor. Great. I look forward to those. And Chief Burnett and Joe and everyone, thank you. You can tell that you're appreciated. And these are tough times right now. And I'm telling you, I think the only city council I could be on is Murray. I think that'd be a tough job. I mean, it's tough enough, but we're really lucky and blessed in this city. So I give my thanks to you officers, our first responders, and to the council for their interest in all this and listening to our citizens. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Chief. As always, I appreciate you, your officers, from the command staff down to the newest officers. I think we have the best and the brightest in the industry, and that reflects because of the leadership we have. With that, we'll move on to announcements. Jan.
Based on time, I just have a couple of things that I will email to you tomorrow. They're just reminders.
Okay, with that, the meeting is adjourned.